everybody, it's Tatiana with Back to Facts. And in light of the Jussie Smollett news where we have anonymous sources saying it's possible the allegations were all a hoax, I'd like to discuss hate crimes. I was really happy to finally get the statistics from the FBI last November for 2017, the first year of the Trump presidency. And what I saw was that all the headlines that screamed that there had been a spike in hate crimes were wrong. Yes, I fact-checked it over and over. The reason is that in 2016, there were almost 1,000 fewer agencies reporting and participating in the hate crime reporting statistics. The amount of law enforcement agencies that participate in this fluctuates every year. For instance, in 1996, when they first began compiling them, there was a certain amount. By 2001, there was the highest number of agencies reporting. So the FBI itself cautions on its website to pay attention to the amount of law enforcement agencies reporting, and that you can't actually compare apples to apples year over year, because I guess reporting takes a budget, it's expensive, I would imagine. And so it's not that the law enforcement agencies that report to the FBI every year have a hate crime, it's that they're participating. Hate crimes were actually at an all-time high in 1996, even higher than 2017. But let's go to 2016, shall we? There were about 1,000 fewer agencies reporting in 2016 as there were in 2017, and guess what? There were about 1,000 more hate crimes reported in 2017. So again, it's not that an agency said, hey, we have a hate crime, we want to participate. It's that amount fluctuates. For example, out of the 15,000 law enforcement agencies in 2016 that participated in the program, 1,776 of those agencies even had a hate crime. So I would like to put everything in perspective. I've been seeing almost as like a gospel developing among our American culture that hate crimes are up under Trump, to the point where I'm sure some of you are even laughing right now that I'm even looking at this. And then when I ask you, where do you get your information, you may say the media. Well, they screwed up on this one. So if we want to drill down into it, about 60% of all racially motivated crimes usually target African Americans, about 20% target whites, about 15% Hispanics, about 6% Asians. It goes up and down. And anti-Jewish bias in 2001 was 55.7%, 27.2% were biased against Muslims. And in 2006, actually, hate crimes against Muslims went way down. And I would surmise that might be because those of us who believe in freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and evidence probably realize there's a difference between Muslims, devout Muslims who do not advocate violence, and those who do. And hopefully most of Americans, it turns out, are actually rational, logical people who wouldn't harm somebody if they hadn't done anything to warrant it. So I thought it was really important to read you this these statistics and tell you should really question what you're being told. Statistics can be easily manipulated. I have worked as a journalist for almost 20 years, and I've seen a lot of crimes. I have covered crime, not as a beat, but like filling in for my crime reporting friends. I know what it's like to look at statistics and then say, oh, this is different than my own personal experience, which is anecdotal. I know what it's like to read an article that talks about a human interest story and zooms in on a family that had a tragedy, but doesn't say anything about, doesn't give it any perspective or context. So you could say that actually that President Trump is doing that with the young, often young, victims who have been killed or seriously hurt by those who are in the country illegally. But it's not that simple. I'm going to be coming out with an article very soon. I've been interviewing sheriffs and advocates, and the point is not that Latino immigrants or unauthorized immigrants are more prone to crime. The point is that it's very hard to deport violent criminals, turns out, for many reasons. And I will be going into that in my article. So Regarding the possible hoax perpetrated by Jussie Smollett, I would just like to say I'm a big believer in not jumping to conclusions. I think that WGN used an anonymous source because they were absolutely sure of the details. That's usually what you do when you use an anonymous source in the right way. The difference between WGN and the national political media is that the national political media is getting their anonymous tips from the intelligence community often about the president, about Congress. There's tons of leaks, right? Here's the thing. They're not held accountable because by the time the evidence comes out and gets declassified, it's maybe 30, 40, 50 years later, and the stuff that isn't classified is like, it's not conclusive. Everything's heavily redacted if you do get any information due to national security concerns. So anyway, the New York Times apparently was so confident in this that they ran an opinion piece by Noah Rothman, associate editor of Commentary Magazine, also a Never Trumper, conservative. So he's saying the details of the Smollett case strained incredulity from the start. Okay, he knew it was fishy. He's criticizing the media. And then he says he gives a list of hoaxes in the Trump era. So, shortly after Mr. Trump's election, a woman in Ann Arbor, Michigan, insisted that she was approached by a white man who threatened to set her on fire if she did not remove her hijab. A Michigan lawmaker tied the case to the president-elect, who he said empowered devastating racism, sexism, and xenophobia. But the police came to the conclusion the whole thing was a hoax. A week after the election, an Episcopal church in Indiana gained national attention when it was painted with homophobic slurs, swastikas, and pro-Trump language. The self-identified gay man who later confessed to the crime was the church's organist. Investigators said he hoped to mobilize a movement after being disappointed by the election results. This is New York Times. Now, they are running this as an opinion piece in the name of fairness, but it's a pretty amazing thing that they're running a list of hoaxes. A few weeks later, an 18-year-old Muslim woman alleged that a group of the president's supporters attacked her at a New York City subway station and tried to rip her hijab off her head. New Yorkers rallied to her defense. Anti-racist demonstrations in Grand Central Station were organized, and significant police resources were devoted to investigating the case. She was later charged with misleading investigators. All of these events occasioned deep dives by the press into the forces of racial animus Mr. Trump unleashed during his campaign. But there was no chastened soul-searching when the deceptions were exposed. And few entertain the possibility that the attention these allegations generate has created an incentive structure for prospective hoaxers. There was also the bomb threats against the Jewish community centers. They ended up being perpetrated by an Israeli teen. His parents begged for mercy in an Israeli court and said that he was autistic. This is what Never Trumper Noah Rothman says. The real tragedy in all of this is that hate crimes are, in fact, on the rise in the Trump era, particularly against Jews and Muslims. It's simply not true, according to the FBI. It is natural and noble to want to respond proactively to that condition, but well-intended observers risk indulging their biases by suspending disbelief. Whether it is Donald Trump implying that the criminal acts of one illegal immigrant are indicative of a plague of migrant violence, or establishment Democrats citing one dubious story to indict half the country, there is no justice in treating individuals not as individuals but as representatives of their tribe. False claims of victimization taint legitimate episodes of violent bigotry and discrimination, which is perhaps why those who are honorably committed to confronting prejudice seem to loathe to acknowledge hoaxes when they occur. But those who are inclined to dismiss prejudice in America as a manufactured crisis will only be emboldened by episodes like these. That is why it's incumbent on responsible Americans, especially those with large platforms, to treat alleged crimes as just that, alleged. I agree with you, Noah Rothman. The only thing I don't agree on is that hate crimes are on the rise, indisputably, against Jews and Muslims. We can go through every mass shooting. People say, "Oh, right-wing violence it's all white males." You know, remember Don Lemon? White males are the biggest threat to this country. Actually, if you look at all the mass shootings, there's tons of other motives. There was the guy in Orlando, Omar Mateen, motivated by our bombing of Syria, among other things, and homophobia. Not right-wing, though. There was the guy just earlier this week in Aurora, Illinois. Black guy. There was a DC sniper. There was a black guy who killed 5 cops after the high publicity on officer-involved shootings of unarmed African Americans. There was A guy in Sutherland Springs, Texas, an atheist, Air Force guy who had a record of spousal abuse. He killed, I think, like 25 parishioners at a church in Texas just recently. There was Dylan Roof, of course, deranged. Then there was a Roger guy in Santa Barbara, Asian. Then there was a guy at Virginia Tech, Asian. The thing is, I don't even keep track of this stuff because I think the biggest lesson out of all this is that we should not judge people by their skin color or their tribe. And I hope that we can all really take a lesson from this. It behooves us to look at things dispassionately and emotionally. And you may say, and unemotionally, you may say, oh, but I've seen the flyers. Oh, but I've seen the graffiti. Yes. The thing is, a lot of these things aren't investigated fully. And it could be just really irresponsible young people. Now, does that mean they get a pass? No, they don't get a pass. What's the difference between a young person who's just trying to cause trouble, or let's say a mischievous Russian trying to just have us be fighting against each other, right? And a person who genuinely thinks that brown people and black people are inferior. I mean, when I actually personally don't know anyone who thinks that. I am not trying to minimize racism. Racism is alive and well. As we can see from these hate crime statistics, African Americans have suffered the most percentage. We also have to take into account, though, that they're reporting the most, but obviously, probably it's statistically impossible for them not to have the most share because it's so much. It's like in the 60%. So what I would say is this situation and the lies by Noah Rothman and the associate editor of Commentary Magazine in the New York Times, and the lies by the New York Times when they reported on the FBI's hate crime statistics are not acceptable in this day and age because they're turning us even more against each other. Fear begets hatred, begets fear, begets hatred. And so it behooves us to really do our homework. And actually, I would love to teach a statistics course to everyone because we've really lost the art of interpreting statistics, what we should compare things to, how we can analyze whether something is probably correct or how we can see that it doesn't add up. So thank you for listening. I appreciate you and have a great night. We say the time is now. No longer will we bow. So say goodbye to control over my body and my soul, over my body and my soul, over my body and my soul.